Hello guys, in this lesson I'd like to show you how to create portraits on white paper. I'm going to show you the progression of building contrast and how to bring the light into the portrait. In this demonstration we are not going to use white colored pencil for the highlights, rather we'll leave paper white to serve us as the lightest light on the face. Please download all the references given to you in the lesson. I'm using In and Out Pages colored pencil drawing pad for this demonstration. Before I begin shading, I look at my colors that I have, and then I look at my reference picture and I pick my basic colors that I see in the picture. Of course, I can use a lot more colors on top of this, but I want to be sure picking major hues that I see in my reference, and then when I start shading, I keep switching among these colors only. It helps me with the consistency of drawing, and it also helps me with color unity. I use a scrap piece of paper, and just when I make my pick, I color it and I see how different it is from some other of my choices. I could use all of them, or I could pick just one. As you can see, a lot of colors are very similar in color and tone. It just depends on how light or dark you're going to push it. In essence, instead of having, say, 3 or 4 colored pencils, you could do just one, but vary your pencil pressure or vary layering to achieve the same result. I always start drawing from the eye and eye area, because I think if the eye doesn't look right, nothing else works. And I take my black colored pencil and begin working on the outlines, but I want them to be quite soft, knowing that I will come back and shade over them again and again. But I want to have a placeholder to begin with, and this is what you see me doing here. The pupil and iris must be nice and round. Always watch out for that, guys, as you keep drawing. I always look at the same thing, lights and darks, and I focus on my darks first, and I just try to fill them in, and that it includes the eyelashes. I don't really look at every single eyelash. I rather shade it as a complete shadow and then draw the eyelashes on top of that. I mark the shape for the eyebrow. Notice my pencil direction and the strokes that I'm doing. Now I have the placeholder for my eye, and I begin introducing color by shading over the same darks. I use dark green to shade the shadows at the top of the eye, and go in circle to shade the iris and pupil. And then I fill in the eye with green using a particular stroke going around the pupil. Now I take my deep blue and resume doing the same thing, going over the shadows. I basically shade over black, and it just adds color and depth to this basic black. I shade the bottom of the eye using the same pencil as well. Now I'm going to switch between colors. I include all of them here, but basically I look at the secondary darks, shadows that are not as dark as the black and blue, and I begin filling in the eye, looking at this pattern of light and shade. Her skin has a lot of warm brown, and that's why I use these warm browns and reds and oranges in the eye. Notice that I don't shade the highlight in the eye, and I reserved more space for the highlight at the upper eyelid just for now. I can always go back and make it smaller, but it's best to keep it large enough so it wouldn't be a problem later on. Her face has a lot of green in it, and I'm just using one of my greens that I have. This is warm green, and I sketched out the outlines using this color. I'm gonna place shadows using this green, and then I will layer natural skin colors on top of that. People with white skin have a lot of green in their skin just by nature. Here I used up and down stroke to fill in the shadows on the face and the background using this single green colored pencil. I filled in all the shadows that I saw using this green. Notice that my pencil direction changed depending on the area I shaded in. And I added some basic black to set up the contrast. I used black in her hair and the sweater. And once again, the pencil stroke was different to describe both forms. I always start shading from the deepest shadow. I block in the deepest red right in between the lips. And then I look at my reference to see which lip is darker. The bottom lip is darker than the top lip, and also the highlight runs through the bottom lip. When I begin shading, I think of the volume and curvature and adjust my pencil strokes accordingly. Later on, I'll be adding the same reds into the skin tones as well. These are three types of blenders that I use, but mostly all three of them work for wax-based colored pencils. I really like this blender because it doesn't leave any residue, it's clear and the colors are vibrant, but it's very time consuming to blend my art using these pencils. Sometimes I use this one, which is very similar to a solvent, but it's kind of like a solvent in a brush, and things go real fast when I blend with this one. And finally, if I need to blend large areas or the paper has tons of texture, I often use Gamsol with a synthetic brush that's reserved for this purpose only. Now I'm gonna show you how finesse works. Basically, you just go over the area and blend it. I don't use a lot of pencil pressure, I just keep it nice and light. So the area becomes a lot smoother. This paper is actually very smooth, and a lot of times I don't need extra blending, but I just want to show you how it works on this piece. I sharpen my full blender the same way I sharpen the colored pencils. There is no difference. It's the same as sharpening a woodless colored pencil. And also I use a very simple pencil sharpener that has a German blade. Whenever pencil sharpeners have the German blade, they last a lot longer and make a very clean cut. I absolutely love it, and I can achieve a similar result using the full blender, but it's gonna take me much longer to basically go over my drawing and blending it this way. I think finesse is more effective. The reason for using the full blender is that a lot of times skin tones are very nice and soft, and if we use harsh blenders, some of the lines may appear too harsh and just not natural. Because this type of blending just looks more natural, it gives me better results. Also, when you do the blending, make sure the surface underneath your drawing is hard and smooth, because otherwise you're gonna get these little things that basically rub off the surface. Make sure it's nice and clean behind the picture. Now I'm going to add some red all over her face where I see it. I see a lot of red in the shadow here on her nose. There is a lot of red up in here, and of course there is some red over here, and the ear is always a very warm medium tone red. Colored pencils are semi-transparent, so it's possible to add colors in layers. Let's say if the area is quite dark in here, I can layer the same color over and over again to achieve the darkness that I want to have, as opposed to pressing on my pencil very harshly to get the same result. It just depends how soft or aggressive I want to be about achieving the same result essentially. Also, I keep rotating my pencil depending on the shape that I draw, because this is an eye socket and the eye sits inside of it, and it's a very large shape that has a lot of purplish gray around here and over here as well. This is natural, and I will be adding some purplish gray later on, but because I'm working one color at a time, I just want to see where I need to add it, and I keep adding it as I go. The nose has a lot of warmth in the lower part of the nose. There is a lot of reddish, orange red in this part of the nose. So I know that I will be adding some orange in here as well. And if you notice, I treat one area that is a shadow just like a solid shape as of now. Later on, I will create subtle differences in tone in this big shape. The same is true about anywhere in the face, like this part of the face is in a deep shadow, and I'm treating it as a flat shadow right now, adding color flatly, and then I will start separating between between different tones found within this big shape. And remember, the highlights must stay free of any shading. Please don't shade them. Even with your light pencils, you will lose luminosity. And you must remember where the highlights are and shade carefully around them. I have my subtle light in here. I have a strong highlight in this part of the face. I have a highlight here running across the nose, and there is a strong light over here and here as well. So that this means that I'm gonna shade up to that highlight, leaving it white. Before I begin blending the face a little bit, I want to show you a few things to pay attention to. For instance, this area over here appears to be flat. There is no difference between this space and this space and in this space. But actually, in real life, the nose goes in and out, and then the forehead goes in and out again. And I'm gonna show it with subtle shading after the blending step. And I'm gonna think about it before, like during my blending step, because I want to create those differences in the light, because this area is always a little bit darker than the area over here, and then the forehead is actually subdivided into a couple of different tones as well. And when I start blending stuff over here, I'm gonna think of the cheekbone and how it rotates in space, and how it forms a triangle here, and how my shading should be done around the eye because I need to change pencil direction as I blend here as well. This entire space needs to be in the shadow. This is lighter, but it's not white. I'm just leaving it white for now because I want to use a different color here. And the same is true about the nose. The bottom part of the nose is in the shadow and it's going to be blended, but then this part of the nose is the lightest, and this side of the nose has a very light tone that I'm gonna color in a different pencil later. I just want to get rid of texture on her dress and the hair. Just want to make it look a little bit smoother. And lastly, I want to focus on this area and this area. So I'm going to have sharper focus in these areas, but I will try to soften the edges over here as much as possible, and that's gonna give me a contrast between sharp edges and soft edges, just like what you see in the picture. I blocked in the background using black and greens, and now I have a clear contrast between the light tone on her face and the surrounding darkness that we see in her hair, the background, and her clothing. Here you see me switching between the blenders, but either one could work. It just my colored pencil blender pen dried out and I couldn't blend it as well as it was supposed to blend, and that's why I used Caran d'Ache full blender to do the job. When the blenders work, the surface becomes darker, more saturated, and of course it becomes more even and blended. After the initial blocking is done, I basically go back in circles and keep reinforcing the darks and developing textures in the eyes and eyebrows. Whatever needs to be done just to increase contrast. These are two primary colored pencils that I use to describe the light on the model. Basically, I keep shading and overlapping them over the previously applied colors, and also just layering them in different direction to achieve the result that I want. I shade the lightest areas with them, but I also overlap these colors a lot to blend the surface. A common mistake that students make, they take one color and shade a particular space with it, leaving empty space next to a different color. What I do, I keep overlapping the same colors over and over again, and that's how the edges become smoother and they look blended without using the blender. And also when you keep overlapping the color, it becomes richer and vibrant, despite the fact that you can use just a few colored pencils. I used the same colors to shade over the background one more time. I used a very heavy pencil pressure to fill in all the gaps, and I tried to make it as even as possible. I still have these things. I'm not sure if I want to leave them like that or I should go back and shade some more to get rid of those. But my goal here was to create a transition from dark blue into the greens and the light. I also repeated my previous step and just went over this area and filled it in with black and some dark brown, like burnt umber. Any kind of dark brown would work here. I put more brown on this side because the light shines this way, and this area must be lighter than the corner over here. This part should be the darkest. I think of contrast, and because it helps me shade everything else in relationship to that deepest dark and this lightest light. Because if I know this is my deepest dark, then everything else needs to be lighter, like her hair. They're going to be quite dark, but they're not going to be as black as this spot. The same is true about the highlights. These are uncolored. I'm gonna shade a little bit more to make them smaller, but I'm gonna leave the paper white to have this sunlit look on the face. Remember not to color your highlights when you draw on white paper because you lose luminosity. And even if you start erasing back into, trying to get the highlight back, it doesn't quite work because the paper looks worn out. So always remember to leave more space for your highlights, but then you can go back and shrink them some more to have a very nice, beautiful highlight. Also, what I did here, I filled in the hair some more using black and some green. Once again, her face, the background has a lot of green, and I put some green over here for color unity, but I also see it in the picture itself. Another thing is that I watch my edges very carefully. At this point, I want to make this edge very nice and soft without harsh outlines. This is still kind of not soft enough. I need to go back and soften it some more. I'm keeping this edge very nice and soft, and to do so I'm making small circular strokes as I shade. I don't want to have a sharp edge as opposed to the space over here. One more thing I want to show here is the use of the eraser. I usually use a kneaded eraser for this purpose, but because this paper has been filled in a lot, it's just kneaded eraser is not gonna work at this point. I'm gonna use this mono zero eraser and lift out some highlights that I can fill in with the color if I need to, or just leave them the way they are now. This is one of the ways how you can deal with the area that you can shade around it, right? You know, these pieces of hair are so tiny, it's impossible to shade right to the edge, and then over here it feels like the background is not gonna fall behind the hair. So that's my reasoning for filling it in completely first, but then going back and erasing some of the hair. And I can repeat this process several times until I feel like it's working. And there is a lot of texture here. I've created some of the texture with my shading, but I want to have like more, teeny tiny hairs like going in different directions, and it's easier to do with this eraser. I do need to press on it quite hard to get a clean edge. And I also need to clean up the eraser itself once in a while too. But that's one of the ways how you could deal with these small highlights and create texture that you need. I wanted to break off this edge, and that's why I'm creating this texture here. I just don't like a long edge. Just doesn't make any sense. So I'm thinking I could do some texture here as well, but if it doesn't work out, I can shade over it and do it again. I shaded this space with more black, but I see that I need to add some black here as well for consistency, because this part of the face is in a deep shadow. But now you can see the transitions and how I build up contrast, and now you start seeing that the darks play with the lights, and it creates a very sunlit look using very few colored pencils. When I shade, I use a light pencil pressure because this is black and I don't want to overdo it. I'd rather go back and shade with another layer as opposed to shading very dark in one layer, because colored pencils are semi-transparent. You can build beautiful depth by shading with the same colors over and over again, and this way you build depth and contrast. I want to mention the fact working with these colored pencils, Polychromos. There are both advantages and disadvantages working with these colored pencils on smooth paper. These are great for producing details, working on details, tiny transitions, like drawing out small hair, things like that. But these colored pencils could be incredibly frustrating if you start shading large areas, because they're not as soft as Prismacolors. In fact, they're kind of hard. You have to use lots of pencil pressure to fill in the paper, and at some point it could become very frustrating. Another thing is that when I draw on smooth paper with these pencils, I need to do a very tight shading to fill in small gaps. And I think Prismacolors do a better job when shaded over smooth paper as this one. But these colored pencils have very good light fastness, most of them. light fast, and they are also waterproof, and they can be used to do incredible detail. That's the reason why I often use a combination of colored pencils by different brands. Let's say filling in the background using Prismacolors, or working on large shapes using Prismacolors, and then going back into my drawing and shading over smaller areas using Polychromos. But because I'm doing this demonstration, I just want to minimize the amount of brands, so it's gonna be easier for students to start working using one brand and just relying on the color chart. This edge needs to be very soft. When I keep shading, I'm aware of it. I try to shade softly around here, like doing small circles, not to end up with the harsh edge. The same is true about her lips. This edge needs to be super soft. This one can get outlined quite a bit because we define the lower lip by the shadow that's behind the lower lip. So it makes sense to shade darker here and have a harder edge as opposed to this area. I darken the corner on the forehead because it also needs to be in the shadow, but once again I'm gonna do it in layers to create depth and smooth shading. Here I switch between several light colors to develop three-dimensional form by creating subtle transitions between the tones, describing every shape, thinking about the roundness of the shape, and going around the highlights very carefully. The area around and under the eye has a lot of blue, gray, and sometimes it has purplish colors. This is natural, and it's a good reason to use these colors under the eye. Oftentimes light blue appears next to a highlight, and that's the reason why I used it on the lip. I want to give you 6 tips to improve your drawing. It doesn't matter if you work on this one or anything else. All tips apply to everything that you draw in colored pencil. Tip number 1. To lighten up a specific area, use white or off-white colored pencil with heavy pencil pressure. Shade with it over the previously colored surface. It's a very good technique to blend the edge or to make a specific area lighter. If your paper is too waxy and it doesn't accept colored pencil anymore, use a little bit of spray. Spray it outdoors, let it dry, and your paper is gonna give you a little bit more tooth to apply more color over the drawing. This is really important. Like softer colored pencils are much better to draw with in general. You need to add harder pencils to work on details, but don't do it in reverse. Like I'm using Polychromos, and these are hard pencils. It can be very frustrating to draw large areas with these pencils. It's better to use softer pencils like Luminance or Prismacolor, but then switch to harder pencils to do fine detail. Tip number 4 is to pay attention to contrast. Always step back and look at your drawing from the distance to see if you could expand your value range and have more values in between white and black. Tip number 5. Always keep improving shading. Pay attention how subtle the transitions are between the tones, and just keep working on that. I still find that when I shade, I could be better at making softer and more subtle transitions to create this roundness of the form. Tip number 6, step back from your drawing very often and see which highlights you need to tone down. We reserved enough space for all the highlights, but now we need to decide which ones need to be the strongest. I look at my reference a lot to understand which ones are going to be the brightest, and that means that everything else needs to be a little bit darker. I use lighter pencils to go over the highlights that don't need to be as bright as my lightest highlights. Hope it helps you, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Bye-bye.